Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad you tuned into this episode with Peter Weinberg from Evidenza. There's so much great stuff packed in here. We get into the promise of AI-backed marketing strategy, how cutting-edge thinking meets cutting-edge technology, why CFO-ready marketing strategies are important, and really the importance of marketers learning financial language. This episode's been sponsored by Quatical, fractional marketing leadership using evidence-based marketing practices. That's quatical.com.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vassilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Peter Weinberg joining us from Evidenza. Peter, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, Marc. Thanks for having me.
I'm so thrilled to have you here. So you are people probably know you from the B2B Institute, I would think. Also authored several great papers and articles for Marketing Week. We'll include links to your show and some of these articles in the past. But you've recently started with John Lombardo, Evidenza, which is a big reason why we have you here, to talk about that company and the direction of that company and what you're doing there, because it's fascinating. It's so good.
What a time to be alive, Marc. The era
right?
of synthetic research. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so maybe we could start there. I mean, we've got a series of questions. We'll probably meander around these, but maybe we can just start there on when you said synthetic research, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea is that any marketing decision ideally is underpinned by some sort of research and data, as opposed to random people's opinions, which is often the driving factor behind many marketing decisions today. The problem is getting customer research or market research is really a pretty cumbersome process, especially in B2B. It tends to be very slow, tends to be very expensive, especially for these hard to reach populations like CEOs of big companies or, aviation mechanics or mining operators, these types of audiences, super low incidence rate. So the idea of synthetic research is that actually instead of talking to, say, real CFOs, you create AI generated copies of CFOs. So thousands of different permutations of a CFO at a big company. And then you ask them questions. You can do quant or qual research against them. And what we have shown through pretty extensive testing is that you get pretty much the same answers you would have gotten from real people, from real CFOs. You just get it, 1,000 times faster and at a fraction of the cost. So that is the basic premise of synthetic research. It's AI generated research to ultimately inform marketing strategy or marketing decisions.
It's wild.
It is wild.
These are great times. It's pretty
crazy.
Awesome that we have the tools like this to be able to do it. So how did you get to this point then? Like, what brought you here? I know AI, everybody's it's been a huge topic for everybody, but how did you find your way to this position at this point in time?
Yeah, I kind of think of my career in three phases. The first phase was I knew nothing about marketing, but worked in marketing, which was probably 10 plus years, the situation many marketers find themselves in, or we're not really trained in marketing. I was just kind of thrown in the job, handed down some myths and information from senior management that I was executing on mindlessly for many, many years. And then we really, and I credit John with this primarily, we stumbled upon this marketing effectiveness revolution, which is, this wholesale rethink of how brands grow and really what the fundamental principles of marketing are, none of which I had ever really been exposed to or even thought about.
Yeah.
So that's the, era of the B2B Institute, where we started this think tank within LinkedIn, partnered with a lot of experts to figure out how the laws applied in B2B. So I went from kind of knowing absolutely nothing about the theory of marketing to knowing a lot about the theory of marketing effectiveness. Yeah. The problem, and this is in the third phase that I ultimately stumbled upon, is that, you can read how brands grow and, you absolutely must. It's like mandatory reading for marketing effectiveness. But you actually have to put the ideas into into practice, right?
Right.
And that's where things become very difficult. There's not a huge amount of guidance on how you actually apply the principles. And you eventually hit this limiting factor of market research. You have to know what your distinct assets are. You have to know what your category entry points are. You have to know what your extra share of voice is. Like, these are all great concepts, but they need to be, measured and applied at the brand level. And so John and I at LinkedIn were working with very big B2B clients to put these principles into practice, like Salesforce and other clients like that. But, we just found, again, the limiting factor of market research. We just found we could not scale that aspect of what we were doing beyond, like our top 5 biggest clients, because it was too slow, too expensive to actually survey CRM buyers or cloud computing buyers.
Yeah.
That's when we stumbled upon this idea of synthetic research, and we just thought it could be a way to kind of bring access to marketing effectiveness to a much, much broader group, taking the efficiency gains of AI with the effectiveness gains of Ehrenberg Bass and Bennett and Veal, kind of bringing them together in one company.
It's interesting because you're kind of, you've been, I would say, on the forefront of 2 fields now, the effectiveness field, which I think for North America is maybe a earlier stage of adoption than, say, other areas.
Yes.
And then there's the AI side of things, which is also, that's being rapidly adopted, but also kind of one of those things where a lot of people are not, everyone's talking about AI, but never really sure how to do it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So you're kind of selling 2 different ideas or principles. Is one easier than the other, or are you finding really general broad acceptance for the ideas of both the AI side and the validity of that, and then the effectiveness side?
Yeah, it's a great question. We think of it as, you need cutting edge thinking and you need cutting edge technology. So you need to be on the cutting edge of what you should be doing in the first place. And then you need to be on the cutting edge of how you do it in the first place. To your point, I think the reason why the AI revolution has accelerated so much faster than the marketing effectiveness revolution is because it's an easier sell. You don't have to rethink everything you're doing. You don't have to consider the idea that the opposite of everything you're doing might be the right thing to do, which is a kind of like scary proposition. It's just the promise of efficiency of whatever you're doing, you're going to be able to do it much faster and much cheaper with AI. That is the fundamental promise. And whether you're doing the right things or the wrong things, that's efficiency is a win. I like to joke, if you're doing dumb shit, you might as well do it faster and cheaper, right? Like that's a win. Yeah. Nobody ever laughs except for you, by the way, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, it reminds me, there's that quote of shit that arrives at the speed of light is still shit.
Yeah. And that's true, of course. But it doesn't take into account the let's say the efficiency at which the shit is delivered at the speed of light, like something there. So I think an efficiency revolution is a win either way. And that's why you've seen kind of broad adoption and excitement around AI. But, rethinking what you use AI to do in the first place, I think that's a harder task. It requires you to really you got to read a bunch of very dense academic books and kind of academic concepts. You've got to rethink how your marketing team is structured and what your objectives are. So there's a lot more friction for sure on the effectiveness front than on the efficiency front. But ultimately, the most successful marketers will have both.
Sure. And I imagine in some ways, as you said, there's no necessarily guide for some of the effectiveness stuff. The idea around, say, the 60-40 rule, that in a sense is a guide, but it's really hard to then split your budget that way. And so I imagine the package that you guys put together, we'll talk about that a little bit more too, but it seems to me like it helps provide a roadmap on how to implement some of these ideas. So then you're left with just the learning about the idea rather than learning and trying to figure out how to implement.
Precisely. Let's just stick with the 95-5 rule, which was our biggest hit at the B2B Institute. 95% of people are not in market, 5% are. That is a heuristic, just like the 60-40 rule. It's not it's generally true of every category that most buyers are future buyers. But, is it 90-10? Is it 95-5? Is it 85-15? Those will vary depending on a lot of factors. Again, same with the 60-40 rule. So the question is, okay, well, where is the system that helps you measure all of those factors and come up with the 95-5 rule for your particular brand and your particular category? Prior to AI, it didn't really exist. I mean, you would have to go run a survey. And there is a very particular, quantitative survey behind the 95-5 rule. But how many marketers were actually doing that? They weren't cumbersome. They were just saying 95-5. So that's the promise, I think, of AI, the ability to take these sort of abstract general theories and really put them into practice with technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for Evidenza itself, like what's I think maybe we talked about this a little bit, but is there a specific need that you guys are trying to target, a way that you see the market on who you're targeting this for?
Yeah, I mean, we have clients who are big companies, small companies, medium companies. We've got B2B brands, we've got B2C brands. As you know, I believe in broad targeting and broad reach, so I try not to target any particular segment. But I will say, I think where we have gotten particular product market fit is with big B2B brands. Because as I said, like market research is annoying in B2C. It's basically impossible in B2B. Like some of these audiences, like a CEO of a Fortune 50 company is not going to take a 100-question survey in exchange for a $50 Applebee's gift card. It's just like a very hard sell. So, in some cases we are replacing the traditional approach with the synthetic approach, and clients are saying, hey, is this as good as what I have? In some places we're actually bringing data to a conversation that previously had no data at all. They're saying, is this better than nothing? Because I couldn't even survey my audience before. So, I'd say we are mostly working with big B2B companies. Like that is our sort of like primary audience at this point, because market research has been such a pain point for that particular segment in the past. Yeah.
And it's a tough one. I know there's a ton of stuff published specifically around like the buying journey and the number of buyers inside of each committee and that kind of stuff, which is so complex and so complicated. To your point, like nobody's going to, even if it is like rib week at Applebee's, probably the $50 gift card isn't going to.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I love rib week as much as you do. I mean, it's a national holiday, but it's a tough sell for these CEOs. They could have rib week every week is rib week when you're the CEO of a huge company, Mark. So how are you going to get those people to take a survey? I mean, it's just not possible.
Yeah. In terms of marketing effectiveness principles, we talked about broad reach as one of the things. And your approach, there's the other idea, category entry points. I was kind of curious about the category entry points that you might use to help you shape the positioning of Evidenza.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so category entry points, the key idea. It's when the 95% becomes the 5%. So what moves people in market, and do you come to mind when people enter the market? And in any given category, there could be 20, 30, 40 different category entry points. And in B2C, they're usually pretty easy to understand. Like, I want a different beer when I'm at a tropical beach versus when I'm in an Irish pub, and different brands get recalled in those different buying situations. I mean, for us, there's, again, like all brands, we face the challenge of there's many different category entry points we could target. This idea of faster, more efficient market research can play in a lot of different spaces. But the research would tell you, you can't go after every category entry point at once. You've got to prioritize. If you're a big brand, maybe you could go after like 10. If you're a medium-sized brand, maybe 5. If you're a very small brand, like our company, you really got to choose like 1 or 2. I think our primary category entry point has been like, you're a CMO. That's your situation. You've got a meeting next week with the board or like your cross-functional stakeholders in finance and sales. You've got to present your marketing plan. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to be second guessing everything you say. And you need to have some sort of objective truth. And ideally that objective truth comes from your customer, because, the CFO isn't always right. The customer is always right? It's the ultimate source of truth. Yeah. So we are ultimately giving CMOs a data-driven marketing strategy that is framed in a way that is, compatible and friendly with finance and sales and all these cross-functional stakeholders, but it is powered by this new technology of synthetic market research. So our category entry point is like, basically you've got a big executive meeting and you've got to prepare, you've got to have a plan. Think of Evidenza. It's our go-to-market strategy in a nutshell, I would say.
It's pretty cool. So if you don't mind, I'd love to dig into that because part of what makes Evidenza so interesting is the speed. And you talked about this, 1,000 times faster, but can we just break down like how that works? Synthetic research, I know there's the idea of digital twins, I think it was called, or duplicates or copies of, and so you create these like sort of personas, I think, synthetically. And then what happens? Like, how does that all come together with you? And within a week, you can have a marketing plan.
Yeah. So, in many cases, this takes place in the span of hours. You still need a human in the loop to kind of QA it and to run the reports. The humans that slow down the process. The AI part is, incredibly fast.
Wow.
But essentially how it works, and we can go as detailed as you want, but at a high level is, you choose a category like risk management. You will build a synthetic sample of people who buy the category of risk management. Everyone from the chief risk officer to a financial analyst. And again, 1,000 different permutations because there's different CROs with different backgrounds in different industries, different personal interests. So you're creating these incredibly detailed individual, as you called it, personas. We call them impersonas because it will impersonate these personas. So you build the sample based on the category, and then you get these synthetic respondents to take surveys. It's kind of a trippy idea, but it's like, just like AI can take, medical licensing exams and legal exams, it can take marketing exams. And, it passes those exams in like the 99th percentile. I'm slightly exaggerating, but it's like the 90th plus percentile.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the marketing exams. It's kind of funny. People are like, no way can it ace a marketing exam. I'm like, it's better than, 90% of doctors and lawyers. Like, you don't think it's better than most marketers? It's a lower bar to clear, but that's the idea.
That's wild. And then so, it's okay. You've got this sample of impersonas. You could pick any number, I'm sure, if you wanted.
You could.
Any number of combinations and permutations, and regions even potentially, I'm sure. So then you run this the survey, and then you spits out all this information, which then gets synthesized in some way into a package,
into a presentation.
Yeah, and so from a marketing strategy, then now you have this evidence-based sort of like sample set that's helping you guide decision-making. Yeah. Which then you can run again and again and again if you wanted to, multiple times before the meeting if you have more questions. And now a short word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by Quatical. Quatical. Did I say that right? Quatical?
You did. Quatical. Yeah.
Quatical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quatical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber Podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company, and so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber Podcast. In part because I give so much time to it. But Quatical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing, and we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million, and helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quatical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber Podcast. And for all those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quatical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show.
Yeah, I think you've hit on, when we first launched the company, we were like, oh, it's much faster. And of course it is much faster. But after having done it for maybe 9 or 10 months at this point, we found out, the speed thing, that's the main advantage. People are like, I have a meeting on Monday. It's Friday. Can you get me something? We're like, of course, traditional market research can't play in that space.
Yeah.
But to your point, Mark, there is the flexibility where, market research is actually super anxiety inducing because you basically get one shot at it. Like you've got to agonize over your questionnaire. It takes 6 months or 3 months or in some cases 12 months to field it and get the results back. And then if it comes back and it's not what you wanted, you're basically screwed. Like you can't iterate on market research. You can't go back to the sample and ask another question. With synthetic research, we have this kind of weird thing where we'll bring a first draft to the kickoff call. And the clients will be like, well, what is this? This is a kickoff call. We're like, well, it's better to start with a first draft. So here is the research based on the brief you gave us. And then you actually iterate into a final deliverable. So you say,
wow,
I'm going to refine the sample a little here. We had this yesterday where, so research came back, said, customers care a lot about quality. And they were like, okay, well, that's a little abstract. Like, can we ask, what do they mean by quality? So another question to the same sample being like open-ended, give us kind of how you think about quality, all the attributes, and then stack ranked in terms of what percentage said, customer service versus reliability, et cetera. So there's this ability to iterate, to keep going down the rabbit hole. And that's been another key limitation of traditional market research. It's just it's not flexible. And often it raises more questions than it answers. So I think that is also part of the power of the idea.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I just finished a survey and with it being in market, and we ended up with, I think it was 110-ish people. And so now, and that took, 5 weeks, 6 weeks to get that. And it's really hard to get these people, funny enough, to answer the survey, and they're marketers. And so now we're at the stage where we're going to review the data and review the analysis, and start trying to figure out what we can pull from it. But you're right. Like I have this sort of anxiety right now because I'm like, I don't know what's in there. And I don't know if the sample size is robust enough to really get a meaningful result out of. So are you finding that as well, that people are pairing like traditional research with what you're doing to help augment it?
Yeah, there's all kinds of combinations. Like I think we have clients who are using it to wholesale replace their traditional research, and in other cases to supplement or augment, as you put it. So like to give you a recent example, a client's like, hey, I ran a giant brand study in EMEA from a senior audience of like executives. Now, as you said, the sample was small to begin with because it's hard to reach audience. What I really want, though, is I want to know, how do the answers differ by market and by our 14 different industry sectors?
Yeah.
Then you're saying, okay, now I'm going to feed Evidenza, the original study, as context, and I'm going to create synthetic data cuts of how the answers vary by market or by vertical. So there's all kinds of different ways. You can also do quant supplement to qual, or you could do qual supplement to quant. There's all kinds of interesting combinations you can use. And I think we are kind of like playing in all of those spaces today.
That's crazy. So for the report you're pulling out of this, then you've got all these different ways to slice the data. You can go back, ask more questions. You can do all those kinds of things. Super interesting to have that. But then you also talk about on your website having CFO ready. I might be butchering the title a little bit, but CFO ready marketing strategies.
Yeah.
So how do you turn the corner of going from just regular sort of market research into CFO ready kind of strategy?
Yeah. Well, you kind of hit on, let's call it the third problem with market research. There's the slowness, there's the expense, there's the inflexibility, and then there's this part, Mark, which is that you get it back and it's like, well, what am I going to do with this? It's like 100 slides of data. And again, I have to present to my CFO. I can't present 900 slides of data. I can't present marketing language. It's got to be translated into financial language people outside of marketing understand. So what we do in our platform and with every report we deliver is that we financialize everything. We assign dollar values. So how that works is, first you will agree upfront with the client on a set of financial assumptions. And again, you can use synthetic data to say, this is what we think the TAM is of this category, the market share of these key players, which in B2B is super, super hard to do to begin with. B2C companies often find that easier. But you have kind of financial analysis up front. And then every other analysis you do feeds off of that financial analysis. So when we do a segmentation, for example, we will say, here is the commercial financial value of all the different segments. When we do category entry points, we'll say, here is the financial value of, drinking a beer on the beach versus drinking a beer in an Irish pub. When we do creative testing, we say, here is the financial value of message A over message B. So we have worked very hard to make sure that it's not just spitting out, tons of research and data. It's doing it in a way that you can then bring to people outside of marketing in order to ultimately, sell in a vision for how you go to market, what kind of decisions you need to make. And I think that's a key part of all of this.
Yeah, that's huge. And so there's the assumptions that on the front end that you're talking about with the financial modeling that you're talking about, that's not an AI thing necessarily. That's like an agreement between your side and what you know about the market. Maybe help influence.
It's very much an AI thing, Mark. It's funny. We could probably start a business just doing that. And we have people on the team who think we should. But, imagine, okay, you want to know the TAM of the soft drinks category or infrastructure as a service. What AI can do is go read everything about that topic. So every earnings call from every company in the space, every analyst report on the sector, and then it can kind of average and aggregate them together into a financial picture of the category, which previously you would call that like desk research. Yeah. It would be, a slow and cumbersome process.
Yeah.
AI, you can essentially do that in seconds. And I do think you still have to, often clients have their own financial data on the category. So you need to kind of pair the outside view with the inside view, but it's AI through the line. It's using AI to get the financial picture of the category and then to translate that into different types of marketing decisions that you could make.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. And okay, so you've got these financial models, and based on the AI report, there's probably questions around the validity of the sample or of the financial accuracy, which I think is course corrected by the company you're working with. But when you get the data from the surveys, before you start making decisions on this, like how much variability or confidence is there in the actual survey results being real survey results and you're not going just off in the left field?
Yeah, listen, I never need to convince people it's faster and cheaper. They believe that right away.
Yeah.
The question is, are the answers any good? Is it a quote unquote hallucination or are they accurate? Right. So I would say, we have about 50 customers at this point. Clients validate the data in one of two ways. I would say the majority, probably 70, 80%, submit it to what I would call just like a sanity check, where these marketers, they know their category, they know their customers. They can also draw upon people like sales teams internally who talk to customers every day to say, like, generally speaking, does this make sense? Does this look right? Or does this look wrong? And in some cases, again, they're comparing it not to an existing data set, but to no data set. And it's better than flying blind. So there's kind of like a sort of basic level of validation you can do by actually seeing the data and kind of thinking about it. It's a common sense check. For the skeptics, then what we do, and we've done this many, many times at this point, is head-to-head validation tests. So what that means is, when we launched, we talked about the example with EY. So the CMO of EY, one of the first people we talked to when we launched the company, wonderful CMO, Tony Clayton-Hine, CMO of EY Americas. And we walked her through this whole pitch that we've been talking about, Mark. And she's like, this sounds like almost a little too good. Like if it is, say it.
Like it literally does.
Yeah. Like this is like, if this is what you say it is, it'd be a very big deal. But is it what you say it is? So what she did is she gave us her survey. So this is a survey she runs every year. CEOs of companies with more than 10 billion in revenue. Very complex survey. It has stuff on investment priorities, perceptions of the big four. She's like, I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm just going to give you the questions and the sample. You create the synthetic sample. You bring me the synthetic answers, and I will compare them to the traditional answers.
Right.
And in the end, we reached 95% of the same conclusions as her actual survey. And, she was shocked. By then, we had gotten pretty cocky. Like, we've done that now maybe 60 to 70 times across different categories, different markets to prove that you're essentially getting the same answers that you would have gotten from real people. So it kind of depends on where you're at in the skepticism spectrum. It depends on what your alternatives are. But generally speaking, it's either a sanity check or it's a head-to-head validation test. And those are two ways you can sort of assess with confidence, how good the data really is.
Yeah. And then in the 5% part, that's different. I mean, there's a probability there that like a confidence interval, you're going to get a variation anyway. And then there's interpretation differences, I'm sure. But even from the original traditional version of that.
Yes. Yeah, then we could get into a whole philosophical rabbit hole of like where they're different. Who is to say which one is right? Traditional surveys are famously inaccurate in all kinds of ways. People lie about who they are to get into the survey. People get bored in the survey and they just start ticking boxes in order to get paid. There's issues with, humans actually collating and presenting the data can make all kinds of errors. So, traditional research itself is kind of error prone. So where they're different, I can't even say with confidence that it's the synthetic or the traditional one that's wrong. Not to mention, Mark, there's just general retest reliability problems in the social sciences and market research more broadly. In other words, like if you give people a survey on a Monday and you give them the same exact survey on a Friday, the same people, you often get very different answers. So there is some variation there. So, it's not always 95%, but it is generally very, very high. Sometimes it's 85%, sometimes it's 87%. And where they're different, I couldn't even tell you necessarily which one is right or wrong. But the point is you are essentially getting the same answers. You're just getting it in a much more efficient way.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other part of it where if you have variability or questions, you just go back to the synthetic sample and ask them to clarify or ask more questions. That's one of the other big advantages, I think, that you just have the ability to ask more and get answers.
Yeah, exactly. If something doesn't make sense in traditional research that you get back, you don't really have much recourse. If something doesn't make sense in synthetic research, you can kind of interrogate why. You can rerun it with a different sample. You can kind of tweak it or understand, where that's coming from. So it goes back to the iteration idea, the ability to correct. Not to mention the fact that, as we always tell clients, like, everything we're doing, everything we show clients is the worst it will ever be. Like the technology is advancing rapidly.
Right.
So the accuracy is not going down over time. It's going up over time. And it was high to begin with. So you've got to, factor that in as well, that after every test we run, we try to figure out what was different and what sort of tweaks need to be made to our, process and our AI and our models in order to make the accuracy stronger and stronger with every test that we do.
So you're using these tools in market segmentation, market research, also in targeting to some degree to help you understand the messaging, the positioning. And then on the execution side, you've got these packages that you're putting together, or financial plans or financially based marketing strategies that help guide decision making on where to put investments and which categories to invest in, or areas and that kind of thing, geographies. So then, is there a limit to where this can go? Like, are you also, you mentioned something about creative testing or messaging. Like, are you also getting into creative? Is there a space there? Like, is this a full service support system?
Yeah, it's a great question. We think of it where we think, our tool kind of stops, is we fundamentally think of it as a planning tool. In other words, before you run a campaign, you need to understand who you're going to target, what you're going to say to them, and what their needs are, their key needs. So those are all, before you launch something, and they need to be underpinned by a set of financial assumptions and reasoning. So it's not an execution tool. Like we we will essentially help you create a brief. You could think of it that way, like a creative brief that says, here's the specific segment we're going after. Here's their specific need. Here's where we stand vis-a-vis the competition. Use these distinctive assets, et cetera. But ultimately then, you need to execute on that plan. And that's where we stop. And, some people would take that brief to a creative agency. Some people probably take it to another AI company that is specialized in creative generation, of which there's like thousands popping up by the minute. Part of the reason we're not in that space is very, very crowded. So, it's who do you target? What do you say? We do come back sometimes with how well are you saying it? So client will say, okay, we developed 10 different campaign ideas for that category entry point. Which one is most likely to work? And we'll put them in front of the same synthetic sample. And there's, it's very broad. There are broad use cases, everything from like product testing to message testing to generic kind of quantitative and qualitative research. But we do think of it as fundamentally a planning tool, planning platform, not an execution platform, not a measurement platform, a planning platform.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask. So it's in terms of measurement, you're not looking at measuring the strength of distinctive assets or the changes in market share per se.
Distinctive assets, yes, that's something we started to look into. AI is actually very, very good at that because that's fundamentally about pattern matching. It's like see all the images produced by Guinness, and I could see all the images produced by Corona, and I could start to understand what makes them distinctive or different. It's actually like very naturally good at that. But yeah, it's fun. One thing it's not good at is it's not a brand tracker. So it's not like you put the campaign into market and then you're using Evidenza the next day to figure out, is your mental availability going up or down? I think a lot of clients want it to be a measurement tool. But for various reasons, like the technology is not necessarily set up to do that right now. We reserve it for things that I would say are stable in time. Like who buys the category? What are their key needs? Which messages do they like? That really has nothing to do with like what happened yesterday. Those don't change much on a week by week or even a quarter by quarter basis. I think it's a great use case for synthetic research. Things that are super news driven, like what happened yesterday, not necessarily going to trickle sufficiently into the data set, tomorrow. And then in general, I think it's not necessarily good at longitudinal research and figuring out how these things are changing. It has an odd understanding of time. So those are, I think, where you start to hit the limitations of what it can do. But, it still leaves a whole set of activities on the table that, again, were just super cumbersome to do in the traditional model.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Like, it's such an interesting area. Like, the company is cool. Like, this technology is cool. Like, the need is real. Like, it's so interesting.
Yeah, well, this is the weird thing about AI, Mark, is like, and I think it's part of the reason we started the company, the discourse around marketing and AI is kind of inane. And it's probably because the discourse around marketing is kind of inane. But it's basically everybody just being like, oh my God, AI can write copy, it can do creative.
Yeah.
John and I are like, yeah, of course it can do that. But it can also do a lot of other things that are in many cases much more important than that and are in fact upstream of that. Like, is your creative even targeted at the right people and saying the right things? And interestingly, like nobody's really talking about that. So people are thinking of the AI applications very, very narrowly for marketing. Yeah. And we're kind of playing in a very different space. Like, what can it do in the world of strategy and planning, not in the world of creative generation?
Yeah. Like everybody's got ChatGPT at the side on their other monitor, just typing in, how would you say this? Copy and paste, shrink this and put it into like a perspective of, an executive or something. Yeah, it's very interesting. As far as your background in marketing goes, how does that help you, or has it, helped or hurt you in terms of running a business now? Because you are doing the marketing, but you're also now running a business, and I wonder if that's influenced. Maybe you don't know if you're not two people, so I don't know if you can really answer that. But like, how does that shape your thoughts around how businesses work?
Yeah, I think it's been, fundamental in shaping how we launch the business and our success. I mean, I'll start with the key insight of all of the marketing effectiveness research, which is like you need top of funnel brand. And, John and I we spent 10 years kind of trying to build our brand in the industry.
Right.
And then we sort of like harvested the demand that we had created in many cases, company. So people are like, wow, it's really taken off so fast. It's incredible. We've got like 50 clients after 10 months, all this stuff. But it's like, it's not, it was 10 years of relentless brand building that got us to the point where we can have sales. So, I mean, and that never is far from our mind. We have to continue investing in the brand business, which kind of gets us to the other funny thing, which is like, people are very focused on the product of Evidenza, as are we, obviously. It's a very novel product, a very novel idea. It's cool. It's, new technology, as you said. But we are also very focused on, well, how can you do it distinctively? So like, we put in a huge amount of thought to like, what is the name of the company? What is the branding of the company? When you talk to like venture capitalists, they get very fixated on the product and what is the moat around the product. And I think there is, an interesting product and a moat around the product. But the ultimate moat in our mind is the brand. You can copy a product. You cannot copy a brand. It's a legally protected trademark. So, we have, for example, tried to be very distinctive, even when it doesn't make sense. So like on a lot of meetings, people are like, why does your company have an Italian name? Why are all the images in all of your decks Italian Renaissance paintings? And it's like, for no reason other than it's like a little weird and memorable. And you're asking about it and noticing it in the first place, How many AI companies have Italian Renaissance branding? So through the line, we've thought about how you use brand to build a business, not just like bottom of funnel performance marketing. Which we have actually done none. And then we are thinking about how do you do that in a distinctive way? And as we said at the beginning, Mark, like how do you broadly target but not target everyone? So like we are targeted in the sense that we're talking about synthetic research for marketers. We could target an even broader market than that. Like we have clients who are like, hey, I'm a lawyer. Could you set up a synthetic jury and have me practice my closing arguments on the synthetic jury? Or like, hey, I have earnings calls next, quarter. Could you set up synthetic financial analysts and have me practice different versions of my earnings calls? So we could target like literally everyone, but instead we're, it's sophisticated mass marketing. It's marketers within synthetic research. And frankly, it's B2B marketers a little more specifically. So all these principles of brand over lead gen, distinctiveness versus just product features and differentiation, broad targeting over hyper targeting. We have used all those principles to grow the business. It's why I believe in all the ideas, Mark, not just because I've seen it for myself, but because, this even happened at the B2B Institute. I have clients come up to me and be like, hey, I was running a small business and I was trying to grow through purely my existing client base. And then I read the Ehrenberg Bass research on Double Jeopardy, and I started focusing on new customers, and it completely and utterly transformed the trajectory of my company. So you got to apply these things for yourself and see them for yourself to really, truly believe in them, I would say.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, because I would say, I'm just guessing, it's not that you don't care about existing customers. It's just, I would suspect, maybe I can ask you about this too, but a lot of your focus is starting with a starting point, assuming that people have never heard of you.
Yes.
And then trying to get that message in a memorable way. So like, hence the Evidenza, easy to say, easy to pronounce, fun to say, distinctive look, feel, all that kind of stuff, and make it stand out a bit more.
Yes.
For people that have never heard of you, as opposed to the other route, which is assume that all your growth is going to come from existing customers and they all know and love you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, listen, there's the really tough pill to swallow, which is that like most growth comes through new customers and not existing customers. People have a lot of trouble with that. It's probably the most controversial idea in the effectiveness revolution. Then there's a kind of easier pill to swallow, which is like, let's just at least think about marketing. So like we here at Evidenza, we have existing customer base and we have, new customers we could acquire. First of all, the amount of new customers we could acquire is like infinitely greater than the amount of existing customers we have. Right. I mean, we have 50 customers and there could be 50 million potential customers. It's just a much bigger pool. But then you start thinking about marketing. Why would I market to my existing customers? My existing customers, their decision to spend more is going to be based on how well did the product work, How well do we support them from a customer success perspective? And luckily, we do a great job, and we have a super high renewal rate. But that's not what marketing is for. Like, their decision is going to be made on the basis of how good was the product once they actually bought it. New customers, they haven't even heard of the company in the first place, or even the category in this place. So the job of marketing is to make sure they even think of us at all in those category entry points or buying situations. So I think the fundamental idea is just that marketing has a very weak effect on existing customers and a very strong effect on new customers. In fact, it's kind of the only way to influence new customers. And so that's where the marketing allocation needs to be stacked.
Imagine the kind of conversations you have with your own CFOs are a little bit different. As marketer, putting on your marketing hat, are probably different than a lot of people have with their own CFOs and other executives in terms of the strategic plan around the marketing, because that, what you're saying, makes sense to me, but also I don't think is common.
No, it's not. I mean, I have a funny thing I do and have done for many years where clients will send a marketing strategy, and I'll hit Apple F and I'll search for a $sign, and usually say 0. There's no $signs in the plan, other than maybe a slide where it's like, we're asking for millions of dollars of budget,
Yeah.
You think there's just like, there is this opportunity to financialize marketing plans. And as you said, it's just not happening a lot today. Marketing is kind of like speaking to itself. And ultimately, although people don't like to hear this, like in many cases, finance secretly runs the marketing department because you need them to fund your activities. And if they don't, you can't even reach the customer. So it's like you have an internal customer, finance. You can't even get to the external customer until you clear the first hurdle of your internal customer, finance. So that's why, we're trying to solve for both. We're trying to help you more effectively market your external customer, but also, market to your internal customer first.
Yeah. And I imagine it creates this, because I'm sure with putting $signs into the report or to the strategic plan, saying, here's how big the market segment is, here's how much we could get if we do X, Y, Z. You're creating a tool that then is almost like has a common language.
Yes.
For both sides to speak, because I think that's one of the challenges where marketers are speaking from a marketing perspective, finance is speaking from finance perspective, but they don't always line up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, you've got to defer to finance is the language of business. Like if you're looking for a common language, the language is money. It's not brand awareness. It's not distinctiveness. It's not mass marketing. It's dollars and cents. That is something everyone in the business, in theory, understands and is oriented around. So, it is incumbent on the marketer to translate what they're doing into finance. Finance is not going to translate what it's doing into marketing. I mean, of course, there's some give and take there, and finance do need to become more educated about how marketing works. But, you get the idea. You got a language of business, which is finance fundamentally.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah. This has been amazing, Peter. Thanks so much for your time on this. How can people? Oh, my pleasure. How can people find out more about you and Evidenza and the Renaissance paintings and all those?
Yeah, the research Renaissance. Buongiorno. Listen, we've got a website, evidenza.ai. You can start there. John and I post a steady stream of obnoxious, contrarian opinions on LinkedIn. So always happy to connect with people there on our beloved alma mater, LinkedIn. If people think there's a fit, would love to chat anytime.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. Good luck to you guys, or continued success, I should say. That's probably a better way to say it. It's really exciting seeing the work you guys are doing. I think it's awesome.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that.
Are you going to say it or am I going to say it?
I was going to say, we were just talking about the power words. I was going to go, the power of post-pod.
There you go. I really love that. It's that time again. Post-pod is here. Let's go.
Yeah.
How's it going, bud?
It's good. It's real good. Real good. Mm-hmm.
What a great conversation you had with Peter there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really fun. It was fun to chat with him, mostly, well, for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of them is, like, we were just talking about this in the preamble as we were warming up for this. doing our vocal
During our
sessions.
vocals.
Yeah. me. But yeah, it's such an like the Evidenza is super interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. They're a case study into themselves of what you can do with AI, and a really comprehensive one. Especially, and I know Peter talked about it, on the front end of like the strategy side of things. A lot of the AI executions we've been seeing so far are like creative outputs, copy outputs, you know what I mean? On the back end of kind of marketing campaigns, data analysis on the back end of a campaign. But this is the very front end of that, which is really interesting.
Yeah, man. Like, again, listening to the conversation and kind of the direction that it was going, I loved how you used Evidenza as kind of like that case study. Obviously, you guys talked about the tool, and for me, what was the biggest takeaway? I think there was a line that he said there was, if you're a CMO and you have a strategy meeting with a board in like 3 days, that's who you call us, and we can get something in your hands for you to be prepared. And for me, when you think about the speed, the agility we all talk about, we've never thought about it in this sense, where you can have in your hands a strong, yes, is it like based on synthetic research, synthetic data, whatever the case may be, sure. But you have something very tangible in a short amount of time, which I think is extremely powerful when utilized the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, just kind of digging into some of this stuff too. Like, there's, I'm just trying to pick on this one thing. He talked about some of the challenges with traditional media or traditional research. Sorry, and like I've just been living through this right now because one of my roles is leading the Calgary Marketing Association. We had a survey in market, and we were pushing like crazy to get people to fill it in.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Oh, great. Awesome. But it's one of those things like where you're looking at the timeline, you go, okay, it's in market, and then we're promoting it. We're doing all the things we can do and trying to get people to fill it in and so on and so forth. And yeah, like at the end, we have kind of a fairly substantial plan built around getting the data, but getting the data is not so easy, I should say, not interesting. No. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But whereas if you could, especially as he mentioned in some specific cases, like aviation mechanics, if you wanted to do a survey of them, like how do you get all those same people from around the world? Like, how do you even find them? Like, there's such an interesting approach that they've taken with this.
It is, and I think more than anything, actually, let me touch on one thing here, because I think what was interesting is as you were asking questions around Evidenza specifically, using kind of that as a case study, you talked to him about category entry points, and yes, it's one of like the effectiveness principles. You want to make sure that you're targeting what's unique or what you want to really go after, because nobody really has the budget to do everything, all the category entry points, right? Even the big brands, like you're still doing maybe 10, maybe if that. I think that's what Peter alluded to. But you asked them, like, what is your category entry point and how are you positioning? And what was interesting in his response, I expected something, around helping broad strokes marketers get a better handle or at least get WAGs in front of leadership to help inform broader strategies.
WAGs being wild ass guesses.
Wild ass guesses, yes, sorry.
That term.
Yeah, but it was interesting that he said, no, we're targeting CMOs. Right. CMOs that are preparing for conversations with their boards, with their internal stakeholders. Right. And that for me was like, oh, this is not just, hey, let's get a WAG. This is 100% legit. Let's get it in front of these executive leadership teams, the boards, et cetera, because that's how confident we are in this. Which I think is a departure than what I think I originally thought the tech was. So them isolating, that's the category entry point and going after, and then specifically more B2B from what I got from the conversation, I just thought was really, really interesting because I originally would have never thought of it that way. But it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's less so like a demographic and more like a need state, I think.
Yeah.
I took away from that, which is a really interesting way to segment the market.
Totally.
And therefore position the product and develop a promise that you can deliver against and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I don't know. Like I want the keys to that thing. I want to.
Oh yeah,
see how that thing works.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. And it would be interesting to know more about is like how it solves for how small you can get in terms of like he's talked about you can get and generate TAM, SAM, and SOM. Yeah. So can you do that for a company of, let's say, $1 million, or can you do it for a company of, say, obviously if you can get to $1 billion, your market size is probably big enough that you can do that kind of thing. But yeah, it's super interesting.
Well, my mind went immediately to, so for listeners that don't know, I work for TELUS, one of Canada's largest telecom, but it's not just telco. Like we have security products, we have internet, obviously mobility, entertainment products, etc. So when I'm thinking about a tool like this, I'm like, well, there's two sides that we as marketers have to solve for. There's the TELUS, why you should be considering TELUS in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then second, at the product level. And sometimes there's like mental gymnastics that are happening constantly because, of course, everyone's going to assume there's a different customer that's looking for security product and a different customer looking for mobility product and trying to find those nuances. The reality is I'm sure there's a larger overlap in audiences than many believe that there are. Mm-hmm. And I would love to have like this tool to test not only that hypothesis, but actually try to get some data around saying, okay, how should we then be positioning? Do we have like a Trojan horse of a product that we should be putting most of our spend against? But again, these are all in everybody's heads, but we can't move at that speed where we can test a lot of these theories to see what the best outcome is, where a tech like Evidenza would come in extremely handy to say, actually, no, you should be using your Stream Plus product and going all in because it's the lowest cost barrier to entry. And then you can create these upsells to everything else, for example, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, it's just, again, like application, like this is how I could see something like this applied in a day-to-day.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, and I think we talked about it a little bit when we were in the conversation, but there's the idea of, let's say, scientific papers, right? Yeah. Where you've got a hypothesis, then there's a methodology to test it, and then you have the results, and then you have discussion. And so whenever there's like any kind of report or study that's been done, at the end of that, there's always discussion, meaning here's other things we hadn't thought about or we should look deeper into. And the same is true, I think, for market research, where you get the research, but you always have more questions.
Totally.
Like, and totally. Even on the questions that you asked, I know Peter talked about it, like, I can't remember the specific example he talked about, but there was a specific example about, I don't know, the way somebody gave an answer to something or the general answer was, which might not be super clear. And so then you want to dig into that. Even though you have an answer, you want to dig into the answer even more to understand it deeper, right?
Yeah.
Which you can do in seconds, which is insane. Like, and you can ask 1,500 questions of that single question in order to better understand all sides and all aspects of it.
Totally. Yeah. Like I just, if you think about, actually, I love that example because you think about when you're going through these presentations for market research, they're usually really long. You have a whole bunch of questions, but because you're moving so quickly, just to get through the material, you actually may not even get a second to ask. Mm-hmm. But imagine now it's like, here are the questions. Let's put them in and let's see what it spits out. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's incredibly powerful. And I wonder if you can almost reverse engineer it as well and say, here's the market research, what it's told us. How do you plug it in to help inform or validate a lot of this as well? Like using it as a check as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know one of the other issues that we were talking about as well during that was the accuracy of synthetic research. And I know he had an interesting point how there's obviously variability in their studies when they've compared the findings from their reports with other partners that they've worked with, and they're getting like 90 to 95% of the same answers. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Which is really interesting. But then, the variability, like, who's to say that that's wrong?
I agree with you.
Like, how do you know? Like, I mean, I know he talked about there's fatigue when, like, with real people when you fill in a survey.
100%.
Then you just get to a point where you're like, oh my God, get through this. I'm done with this. I had only planned for 2 minutes and now it's taking me 6 to fill this in.
That's so true. That is so true. And again, I think that's where we have to acknowledge that, again, the other side of it is like what people say in a survey versus what they do is also is also a whole other thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah. The one thing one of my last things that I thought were really interesting is that I think we should just naturally be taking away. Of course, Evidenza could help doing that, but I would argue financialize marketing plans.
Yeah. That was fascinating, actually, when he talked about putting a Control F $sign into a marketing plan.
Gosh. Yeah. It's like, there's no one's put any money in this one. But it's like, when you think about finance is secretly funding marketing or controlling marketing, and think about it that way, it's like, yeah, you better be changing that language, because I don't know, before you can even talk to the people outside, I think Peter said this actually, make sure you're talking to the people inside the right way and using the right language. So financialize your marketing plans, everyone.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's so interesting when you said that. The other part I thought was really cool was hearing, because I know they worked at, him and John worked at the B2B Institute. They did a lot of stuff with Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And then hearing him explain how they're using those principles for their own branding on the company. It was really cool to hear that. We talked about category entry points, but there's also like the idea of using Renaissance paintings, Italian Renaissance paintings.
I was on their website and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Yeah. Which is and he's like, it's just because it's weird and it kind of stands out. Like there's not really any reason for it, but that we can do it. Yeah. And so like little things like that, I thought was pretty cool. Yeah. I just, that focusing on growth from new customers, obviously he's like, it's refreshing because you don't often hear about people saying, organizations saying, oh, we're really focused on new acquisition.
Yeah.
You always hear we're really focused on building loyalty and land and expand.
Yeah.
As an approach.
Oh my gosh, land and expand. I'm getting PTSD.
Upsell, cross-sell. Like there's all that, right? Which isn't to say that it's not fair. Like, sure, do that. But real growth is going to come from acquiring new customers.
Totally. I almost want to book a demo, a one-to-one demo. Hey, Peter, I need a demo. I'm just really fascinated by this tech. I wonder if they do like personal plans. Like, I just want to play with it. I'm not an enterprise. It's just V.
I want to know what people think about me.
Oh man.
What does a synthetic copy of my family have to say about me? This is a journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. It was a great conversation, though. I absolutely loved a lot of it.
Yeah, it was really good. It's too bad that you couldn't make it. And I know that it feels so weird when you're not there. It's like you complete me.
Yeah, man. I got to say the same for you. It's always weird for me listening back to these podcasts when I'm not there, because it's like there's a part of me, oh, that's a great question, Mark. Oh, that's good. Oh, here's how we could have built on that. Or because I think we complement each other really well.
I think so too. Yeah.
And it was a great episode, Peter. Thank you for spending some time with Mark. I wasn't there, but spending time with Mark was fantastic.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, buddy. Well, with that, I have a physio appointment, and I'm pretty sure she's going to look for some profitability in my back.
I cannot top that. That is
There's a little bit missing there somewhere. Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, did I tell you I cut off my tip of my finger?
What? What's going on? What? How?
I don't know. Well, kale. The kale one. That's how
Oh my goodness.
So much fun that I'm having with myself these days.
Jesus, guy. Well, hey, man. Stay safe out there.
It's no small task for me. There's danger literally lurking around every corner and in every drawer.
That's too funny. All right. Have a great day.
You too. Ciao.